The sun was dipping low behind the mesas when Emerald Hale reined in her horse at the edge of the valley. The sky burned orange and gold, the kind of sundown that made promises feel heavy and unbreakable. She had grown up beneath skies like this wide, unforgiving and honest. And now, after 12 years away, it felt like the land itself was watching her return. Below her stretched the Hale Ranch, or what was left of it. Fences cut across the earth like scars, some newly built, others broken and half buried by time. Cattle grazed near the creek, and beyond them, surveyor stakes marked boundaries that hadn't existed when she was a child. Boundaries that had started a war. Emerald tightened her jaw and nudged her horse forward. She hadn't planned on coming back to Sundown Valley. This way riding in alone, armed not just with a rifle, but with legal papers tucked inside her saddlebag. Papers that said the Hale family had a rightful claim to land, now controlled by the Westfall Consortium. Papers that made her an enemy. As she rode, memories rose unbidden. Bare feet in the creek, laughter echoing off the rocks, a boy with sun-browned skin and a crooked smile, swearing he'd always protect her. Kurt. She pushed the thought away, but it was useless. Kurt Westfall had been everywhere in her childhood, her shadow, her secret keeper, her first love. Until the day his father and hers had shaken hands over a deal that later shattered both families. Until greed and power turned neighbors into rivals. And until Emerald left, the ranch house came into view, smaller than she remembered, but still standing. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was home. Emerald dismounted, boots crunching against gravel, and tied her horse to the post. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dust and sage and something else. Leather, gun oil. She felt it before she saw him. Kurt Westfall stepped out onto the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, a rifle resting casually against the railing. He froze when his eyes met hers. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. Kurt, Emerald said quietly, the name tasting like the past. Emerald, he replied, his voice lower than she remembered, roughened by years and responsibility. Didn't think I'd see you riding back into Sundown. His gaze searched her face, as if looking for the girl she'd been. She stood straighter, refusing to give him that. She was no longer the child who had promised forever beneath the cottonwood tree. I didn't come for a visit, she said. I came for what's mine. His expression hardened, just enough to sting. That land belongs to the consortium now. My family's been hired to protect it. So you're standing against me, Emerald said. I'm standing for what I swore to defend. The words cut deeper than she expected. Kurt had always been loyal to a fault. As kids, she'd admired it. As a woman facing him across a land war, it felt like a blade drawn slow. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. The wind tugged at Emerald's coat, and for a heartbeat, she saw a flicker of something in Kurt's eyes: regret, longing, maybe even pain. This doesn't have to get ugly, she said. Kurt shook his head slightly. In Sundown Valley, it always does. The sun slipped fully behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they both loved and now stood ready to fight for. Morning came sharp and bright, stripping the valley of yesterday's softness. Emerald stood outside the old ranch house, watching sunlight crawl across the land like a quiet warning. In the distance, men rode fence lines, their silhouettes broken by rifles slung over their shoulders. Westfall men, consortium men, all guarding ground that once had no need for guarding at all. She tightened the strap on her holster and stepped inside. The kitchen smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Kurt stood by the table, studying a spread of maps weighed down with stones. Red lines carved the valley into parcels, claims, counterclaims, threats made official in ink and paper. You always did hate mornings, he said, without looking up. Emerald paused. You always noticed too much. He finally met her gaze, and for a second the years fell away. Then he straightened. All business again. These markers, Kurt said, tapping the map, are where your claim overlaps consortium land. If you push this, there'll be trouble. I didn't ride back here for a picnic, Emerald replied. My father was forced out. Lead to this land was stolen. Kurt's jaw tightened. My father says it was sold fair and square. And you believe him? She asked. The question hung heavy between them. I believe in keeping the peace, Kurt said carefully. That's my job now. Emerald laughed softly, without humor. Funny. Mine too. She pulled the folded documents from her coat and laid them on the table. Deeds, testimonies, old agreements bearing signatures from a time before greed hollowed them out. Kurt scanned the papers, his brow furrowing. These are old, still legal, Emerald said, and still binding. Outside, a horse whinnied. Voices carried on the wind, sharp, impatient. Trouble didn't wait long in Sundown Valley. You should leave, Kurt said quietly. Before someone decides this dispute gets settled with bullets instead of words. I won't, Emerald replied. Not again. Kurt's eyes flickered. You left once. The words struck harder than any insult. Emerald drew a slow breath. I was sent away. There's a difference. Silence followed, thick with history. Kurt remembered the night she'd gone, how he'd waited by the cottonwood tree until dawn, convinced she'd return. She never did. A shout cut through the tension. Kurt moved first, grabbing his rifle and heading for the door. Emerald followed, heart pounding. 2 riders had stopped near the Creek Hale land by her claim. Consortium land by Kurt's map. Words were already flying. One of the men spat into the dust. This ground ain't yours anymore. It is today, Emerald said, stepping forward before Kurt could stop her. The men turned, surprised. One recognized her. Hale girl, he sneered. Thought your family ran off. They were run out, she corrected. There's a difference. Hands drifted closer to gun belts. The air tightened. Kurt stepped between them, voice firm. Enough. No shots fired on my watch. Your watch. Emerald shot him a look. Or the consortium's. Before he could answer, a gun cracked, fired into the air, but close enough to send horses rearing. Chaos erupted. One man stumbled. Another reached for his weapon. Emerald reacted on instinct, drawing her pistol and firing into the dirt near their boots. Stop. The standoff froze. Dust settled slowly. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. The war had crossed from paper into blood's shadow. Kurt exhaled hard. This is exactly what I warned you about. Emerald met his gaze, unwavering. Then you know I won't back down. She searched her face, and something shifted. Neither will I. As the men finally backed off, retreating with muttered threats, Kurt lowered his rifle. This valley's changing, he said, and it's going to tear us apart if we're not careful. Emerald looked out over the land, sun glinting off the creek where they'd once promised forever. Maybe, she said softly. Or maybe it's bringing everything we tried to bury back to the surface. The dust settled, but the lines had been drawn. The cottonwood tree still stood at the edge of the creek, its wide branches stretching toward the sky like open arms. Emerald hadn't planned on coming here, but her horse seemed to remember the way on its own. As she dismounted, the familiar rustle of leaves stirred something deep in her chest. This was where everything had begun. She traced her fingers along the carved initials in the bar key, plus cafeted, but still visible. A promise made by children who believed the world could never touch them. You shouldn't be here alone. Kurt's voice came from behind her. She turned slowly, unsurprised, to find him there. He'd always known how to find her, even when she didn't want to be found, seems. The land doesn't mind, Emerald said. He walked closer, eyes fixed on the tree. I thought you'd forgotten about this place. I tried, she admitted. Didn't work. They stood in silence, the creek murmuring between them. For a moment, they weren't rivals or representatives of feuding interests. They were just 2 people haunted by what had been. I waited, Kurt said suddenly, after you left. Emerald's breath caught. I know. No, he replied, shaking his head. You don't. I waited every night, for weeks, then months. Then I told myself you weren't coming back. She swallowed. If I'd stayed, my father would have lost everything faster. He thought distance might keep me safe. And did it? Kurt asked. She met his eyes. No. Wind lifted her hair, carrying the sound of approaching riders in the distance. The valley never let anyone forget the present for long. Kurt, Emerald said, the consortium doesn't care about this land. Not like we do. It's numbers to them. Profit. You think I don't know that? He snapped, then softened. But my family's tied to them now. If I walk away, everything we've built collapses. Everything or everyone? She asked quietly. He looked away. That was answer enough. A gunshot echoed far off, not close, but close enough to remind them both of what was at stake. Kurt tensed. This is going to end badly, he said. I can feel it. It doesn't have to, Emerald replied. Help me prove the claim. We could force the consortium to negotiate. You're asking me to betray my own, Kurt said. I'm asking you to remember who you were before all this. Their eyes locked, the weight of the decision pressing hard. For a heartbeat, Emerald thought he might say yes. Then, hoofbeats thundered closer. A rider burst through the trees, breathless. Kurt, consortium. Men are moving equipment onto the North Ridge. They're fencing it off tonight. Emerald stiffened. That ridge borders my father's old grazing land. Kurt swore under his breath. They're pushing early. He turned to Emerald. If you go up there, it'll spark a fight. If I don't, she replied, I lose everything. The air between them tightened again. Old closeness pulled thin by new loyalties. I can't stop them, Kurt said. But I can make sure no one gets killed. Emerald studied him. Is that a promise? He hesitated, then nodded. It's the only kind I make. They mounted their horses side by side, riding toward the ridge as the sun climbed high. From afar, they must have looked like allies. Up close, Emerald knew better. This wasn't just a land war anymore. It was a reckoning of love unfinished, of choices made too late, and of a promise carved into a tree that refused to fade. As the cottonwood disappeared behind them, Emerald whispered to herself, sundown changes everything, and she feared it might change them forever. By the time Emerald and Kurt reached the North Ridge, the sun hung high and merciless. Dust rose in thick clouds as consortium men drove posts into the ground, the sharp crack of hammers echoing across the valley. A wagon loaded with fencing wires stood nearby, guarded by armed riders. Emerald's chest tightened. This was happening too fast, just as Kurt had warned. She swung down from her horse and strode forward. This land is under dispute. You don't have the right to fence it. One of the men laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. Rights decided by who holds it. Hands moved toward guns. Kurt stepped in beside her. Stand down. Nobody wants blood spilled over a fence. The foreman sneered. Orders are orders, Westfall. You of all people should understand that. Before Kurt could answer, a shot rang out from somewhere up the ridge. Not aims just loud enough to shatter restraint. Everything exploded at once. Horses reared. Men shouted. Someone fired again, closer this time. Emerald dropped to one knee, returning fire into the dirt, shouting for them to stop. Smoke stung her eyes as chaos ripped through the ridge. Kurt, she yelled. He was already moving, dragging a fallen man out of the line of fire. Fall back, he shouted, to both sides. This isn't worth dying for. But fear doesn't listen to reason. A stray bullet struck the wagon's lantern. Flames leaped instantly, racing along spilled oil. The fire roared, licking the dry grass, spreading fast under the sun. Fire, someone screamed. Emerald's heart slammed. The ridge sloped down toward, the valley toward, homes, cattle, everything. She and Kurt locked eyes across the smoke. Truce, he shouted. For now, she answered. They worked side by side, shouting orders, cutting loose burning wire, beating back flames with coats and dirt. Men who moments ago had been enemies now fought the fire together, driven by survival. Emerald coughed, sweat streaking her face. Through the smoke, she saw Kurt stumble as a beam collapsed. Without thinking, she ran, grabbing his arm and pulling him clear, just as fire consumed the spot he'd stood. Okay? she asked, breathless. He nodded, gripping her hand a second longer than necessary. You saved me. So did you, she replied. After what felt like hours, the fire finally died down, leaving blackened earth and smoldering posts behind. The ridge was scarred but still standing. The men slowly backed away, shaken. No victory claimed. No cheers, only exhaustion and the bitter smell of smoke. The foreman spat into the ash. This ain't over. No, Emerald said firmly. It isn't. As the consortium crew retreated, Kurt turned to her, face streaked with soot. This can't keep going. Next time, people will die. Emerald nodded. Then help me end it. He hesitated, the conflict plain in his eyes. If I side with you openly, I lose everything. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. And if you don't, you lose yourself. The words hit hard. Kurt looked out over the burned ridge, the land that had shaped them both. Meet me at sundown, he said quietly. By the cottonwood. Emerald's breath caught. Why? Because there are truths I can't say in daylight, he replied. As he mounted his horse and rode off, Emerald stood alone on the ridge, watching the smoke drift away. The valley lay silent, wounded but breathing. Sundown was coming, and with it, a choice that would change everything. The sun sank slowly, painting the valley in shades of fire and gold. Emerald stood beneath the cottonwood tree, her heart pounding louder than the creek at her feet. The day's smoke still clung faintly to the air, a reminder of how close everything had come to ruin. She expected Kurt not to come, but then she heard hoofbeats. He dismounted a few steps away, removing his hat as he approached. The man who stood before her looked older than the boy she'd loved, but truer too, like someone who'd finally reached the end of running. I've made my choice, Kurt said. Emerald held her breath. I found documents, he continued. Old survey records my father kept hidden. They prove the consortium pushed the boundary lines illegally. Your claim is valid. Her eyes widened. Kurt, if you give those to me, I know, he said. I'll lose my position, my family's standing, maybe more. Why? She whispered. He glanced at the carved initials on the tree. Because some promises don't fade. And because this land deserves better than greed. Emotion swelled in Emerald's chest. You're risking everything. So did you when you came back. He handed her the papers. Their fingers brushed, sending a familiar ache through them both. What happens now? Emerald asked. Tomorrow, the truth comes out, Kurt replied. The consortium will fight it, but they'll lose. And us? She asked softly. Kurt met her gaze, steady and honest. That depends. We've both been changed by this valley. I don't want to pretend otherwise. Emerald nodded. Neither do I. The last of the sun slipped below the horizon. For a moment, the world held still. Kurt reached for her hand. No more running. No more silence. She laced her fingers with his. This time, we stand together. The cottonwood, leaves rustled, as if bearing witness. Sundown sealed what daylight never could a promise reborn. Not in innocence, but in truth. The land war would leave scars. Healing would take time. But as Emerald and Kurt stood side by side, the valley felt less divided than it had in years. Some promises are made at sunrise. The ones that last are made at sundown. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.